This lesson is part of the At the Viewing module. So the idea behind this is you have done your prep work with your checklist, the type of property you're looking at, the area you're going to be looking at, the people you're going to bring. You're not bringing an entourage. You don't need 100 people. So how are you going to make the most of your time? You're going to have a checklist. You're going to have a checklist for the viewing, which I've included as part of this course. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk through it now, and then you're going to see a separate video with the details on it that you can look at yourself and tick the boxes. Okay, so let's get started. So you're at the front of the property. You have your checklist in hand or on phone or on iPad, or you have a little assistant who's doing whatever it is, right? I want you to put in the date, the address, the agent, the status, and the BUR. Just a very quick kind of a note just for yourself, because when you get lost in a sea of properties, it's good to have a point of reference as to where you went, why you went there, the date you went there, who you dealt with, and just a very brief overview of the property. And the reason being that if you meet Andrew Radigan at property 1 and then property 21 comes up for sale and you meet Andrew Radigan again, you've got some form of a frame of reference of the person who's selling it. You know they know the previous sale quite intimately, and then you just get to make a simple connection. This is the human element to buying property, which is you get to connect with someone else and they see that you are a good communicator and they're happy to see your name pop up in their email. So working our way through the list, we're going to look at the front profile of the house or apartment. If you are at an apartment block, I want you to look at the front profile of the apartment block itself and just get a bit familiar with the likes of where the parking may be. It may be underground, it may be surface level. You want to see if there's a lot of visitor spaces, and also if there's anything of note that you're either pleasantly surprised about or maybe concerned about at first glance. That could be poor landscaping, that could be the way it's kept, there could be lots of cars parked there and you don't know why they're there. There could be something that maybe is in a state of disrepair, such as a gutter or drainage. You're not going to try and diagnose it on the spot, but just make a note of the things that you may not have expected. And that goes both ways. You may have 10 visitor spaces and you didn't think there'd be any, and you may have no visitor spaces and you'd hoped there'd be 1 or 2. Just good to be aware of it. And when you're in a house, what I want you to do is stand outside and look left and right. Whatever way that looks on the camera, you know what I'm trying to say. So when you're looking at the house, you want to get an idea of on the street, is there parking? Is it metered? Are all the cars there locals? Are they commuters? Or is there a car that's been there since 1989 and it hasn't moved since? So what this does is it starts to build a picture about the particular property you're looking at. And in this case with the house, the surroundings is just as important as the house itself, because this will give you a better idea of what it will be like to live there. So if you're arriving on a Saturday and you're near a busy road and you see that there's lots of cars parked up the lane, maybe it's because people are visiting. Maybe the locals have to park there because there isn't adequate parking in the development or at the houses. Or maybe there could be 3 or 4 houses that have 5, 6, 7 different people with multiple cars living there. Now that's not anything against them, but it just plays a role in how you're going to live in that particular location. If there's on-street parking and it's metered, just make a note of it, because it then means that you may be entitled to get a couple of years worth of the parking passes that'll make it easier for you to stay there and park, and equally visitors to come as well. If there is off-street parking at the house, it's very simple to be able to say, right, oh, there looks like there's parking, but you want to really get an idea as to whether it's 1 good, generous parking space, whether it's 2 good, generous parking spaces, or is it a bit tight if you have an extra car. Just be aware of it, because on the day you're going to be running in and out, people coming and going, and you want to try and get as clear an idea of the space and profile you're working with. Even if it's 1 car and you want room for bins, or if you want room for a bike shed, something like that, just be aware of it. And as you're looking at the front, you're saying, parking is here. Is there off-street parking? What does it involve? If there's on-street parking, be mindful that that may be like that all the time, or it may ebb and flow. So it's just good to be aware of it. Then you just want to take a glance at the neighbouring properties. Now, I am not condoning, as part of this, I am not going to go on any radio station saying that I condoned anyone breaking into a property. I didn't. What I did do was get you to look at your neighbours. So I want you to just have a glance and say, Does it look like those curtains are from a long time ago? Are they maybe still there? Is it a vacant house? Is it a house that's full of people? Does it look well maintained? Is the garden overgrown? All these little things are obviously part of everyday life. You don't need to know who is beside you maybe on the day, but it's good to get a flavour for who you may be dealing with if you decide to proceed further. So let's say hypothetically, the house you're looking at is beautiful. It's painted, it's been well maintained, and you've got an owner that's very, very proud of it. And it's right next to one where the garden is extremely overgrown. You'd be concerned about a wall that looks a bit wonky towards the back garden. And even at a cursory glance, you're wondering what's happening with it. That's not to say don't buy this particular house, but much like your checklist, all of these features will come together to give you a better all-round view of that location, of that particular property, and also a flavour for what it would be like to live there. And this isn't to judge other people. There's a price to be paid for everything. Like I said, if you're central, you may not have parking. If you're further away, you may not have as many neighbours, but then you have more of a commute. So when you're at the viewing, just take a cursory glance just to see the neighbouring adjoining properties and if there's anything of concern or anything that's good for you to note. Again, I do not condone breaking into houses and asking people their business. That's not the point of this particular question, okay? Then I want you to take a front look at the house and just make a note of what it is you see. This isn't to try and get you to become a surveyor or to pretend you know what you're looking at. But the concept of this is just more to get you to look beyond the simple viewing, which is opening the front door. Have a glance and see, do the windows look like they're new? Do they look like they were done maybe 10-ish years ago? Is there cracking in and around the house beyond what you would think from the photos? Is there something that you're a little bit concerned about? You don't have to diagnose it here and now, but just make a note of it. And it just means that if you do decide to proceed with the property and you do have a surveyor look at it, or you have an expert who you'd like their advice, you can give them a little bit of context. It's like if I asked you what car someone drives and you say, I think it was a blue one with doors. That's not any good to anybody. So what we want to do is try and put together as much information as we can, not to overwhelm you, but just to build a picture that when you do have time, you can make a very simple annotation of what you've seen. And that just means you'll get quicker at it every property you look at, and it gets you quicker looking at the things that you need to discount, but also the things you need to dismiss that are a waste of your time. Okay, so as we're going through the general look, any kind of road issues that you see, whether it be drainage, whether it be if you're there on a wet day and you start to see water coming up out of the sewers, just make a note of it, because it's good to be aware with the Irish climate that that may be an ongoing problem, or it may be something that is only a once off. And that forms part of that drainage piece. So then when you're looking at the rear of the house, we're going to stay outside for now. What we're going to do is do the same you did at the front, but take a look at the back. So if there is side access, if there's a garden, how big is the garden, if there's any other sheds, buildings, things that seem a little bit unusual, just get an idea of the way the garden is laid out. Pull out your phone, check the orientation on the property. I know it seems simple, but I always say, even if I'm selling somewhere or if I'm looking at something and I know it's southwest or I know it's north, take your phone out, readjust it, press it, and then screenshot it. It just means you then have it for yourself to put as part of your viewing pack, and it means you can revert to it later. And it's something you may not have thought about, but it also gets you right back measured in the moment when you're looking at this garden, because it's very easy to have your attention taken by someone else, an agent asking you a question, or another viewer who passes by your view as you're trying to get an idea of what the space is about. Just take into account the areas around you. Again, the back garden of your neighbours, is it well maintained? Is there anything that they have that may be a little bit unusual? So if you were to glance and you saw maybe a pigeon house, or if you saw a dog kennel, just good to be aware of it. It doesn't mean it's a negative thing, but it's better to know about the dog kennel or the pigeon club now than it is 6 months down the line and then have it be a surprise that you weren't aware of. Very, very simple, but just make a note of it. Again, you don't need to impose on other people's privacy, but you're glancing to get a feel for what the neighbour or neighbourhood would be like. And then I want you to look at the rear of the house and do the same as you did with the front. Just notice any cracking, anything that you may have thought was either unique, but also something that you may not be concerned about. Imagine yourself just going through a paint by numbers of the back of the house and you notice a crack on a corner of a wall. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Cracking is part of movement, which is part of anything that's been built. That's part of life. Everything ebbs and flows ever so slightly, especially over 20, 40, 60, 100 years of being built. It's about familiarizing yourself with what it is you're looking for, looking at, and giving you context. And by giving you this rhythm of what to look at, it keeps you focused on the job in hand when you're at this viewing. So you're going to be at the back, anything you concern. If you're looking at extensions, like I said, outbuildings, anything like that, just make a note of them. Because if you have an outbuilding that may not seem like much today, if it's plumbed and it has power to it, that could be potentially another studio, another playroom. It could be anything that you may never have imagined originally. Equally, it may be something that's poorly built and it may become a problem later on. So it's just good to be aware of it. Then when you're walking into the house, what I want you to do is kind of have like a sense check. So as I said, we're going to be polite with the agent, the usual stuff, and that's not to be condescending. It's a huge feature to this. So if you feel inclined, bring them a coffee, bring them a bottle of water. They usually have long days. They have lots of conversations, and showing that you care can be a great way to stand out. I'm not saying that they're going to give you deals on houses, but you're dealing with a human at the end of the day, and it's nice to be memorable. So that's my opinion on that. When it comes to being inside, just get a sense check. Notice if it has been recently painted, if there's any smells, if there's any dampness. If there's something that doesn't necessarily make sense to you, just make a note of it. Again, when it comes to preparation of a house that's been painted doesn't mean there's anything negative has happened. What it means is that someone has prepared the house for sale. But for you to be prepared, it means that you can note this and then keep it in line when you have a surveyor in or you're looking for a second opinion on something, and someone can say, yes, it's been painted and it looks like it's been well painted, it's in good condition, or this paint looks like it's masking potential damp issues, or there could be a query about something else, just to be aware of it. Don't be put off by unusual colours. Okay, when you walk into a house or when you walk into a room, everyone's taste is different. If someone happens to like purple walls, don't let the purple walls put you off. Now that sounds funny to say, but people are very sensorial. When you walk in, they could be quite visual, and you could say, an orange wall and red curtains, I don't like this house. You're potentially missing out on an opportunity. See through that, make a note of it. Grotty curtains, grotty whatever. But then it becomes a conversation, what could this property become? So when you're in the house, just note these things room by room. And you can have a shorthand version of what you understand, BIW for built-in wardrobes, carpets or fitted carpets, whatever it may be. And just make a note of the things you see. Because what that does is it gets you primed when you're imagining yourself in a property for how you're going to live in it. So if I was to bring you into a house and I didn't point out certain things, let's say you go into the bedrooms and they seem like they're an okay size. You walk around, there's enough room for a bed. And then when we left, if I said to you, by the way, there was no built-in storage. So as soon as you put a wardrobe in there, you're pretty much going to have to be like Count Dracula and sleep in the wardrobe. You may not have seen it. So when you have these little rhythms of going through each room, just make a note of things. When you then move beyond the kind of ancillary entrance and you're going into the likes of the kitchen, make a note of the appliances, but only from a space perspective. One thing I will always say to people, unless you are buying a brand new house, appliances are a bonus, in my opinion. Because appliances can last 15 minutes after you buy the house, or they could last 15 years. And it's folly to think that you can use those as an example of an absolute guarantee. When you are buying a house, I always say the appliances are there. Now, this is different if it's a new property or if it's a new kitchen and it forms part of the sale, as in part of that key sales piece, as in €5,000 oven fitted yesterday. That's different. But I'm talking about your run-of-the-mill kitchen where you've walked in, you're just getting an idea of where the carcasses are for your storage, where your fridge or freezer might go, oven, and keep an eye on if you notice anything in relation to the source of the heating or the electricity. So obviously we know electricity is electric, but with heating it may be oil, it may be electric, or it may be gas. Just to be mindful of it, because if there's a gas boiler and it's a little bit older, that's something you then want to look at before purchasing to make sure you know whether, as best you can, whether something will need to be upgraded in the future. So when you're in these particular rooms, just make a note of it. Again, I'm not telling you to find out exactly what's wrong with anything or give everything your expert advice on it. What I'm saying is make a note in each room, then you can be aware when you have time on your own and you're sitting having a coffee, you can say, okay, the kitchen was L-shaped, but I didn't see a freezer. Maybe the freezer was put in the back in the utility room because it took up too much room in the kitchen. What does that mean for day-to-day life? So just keep things like that in mind. So when you're looking around the property, I want you to kind of have this kind of key summary in mind. And then when you leave, I want this to kind of be your overall approach to whatever you've seen. So you've taken your notes: off-street parking, on-street parking, front profile, rear profile, and the interior of the house, making notes in each room as you go. Now, very simple notes. It doesn't need to be an essay because you don't want to tire yourself out from that perspective, but it gets you noticing things. And if you notice, that makes you cleaner and clearer when you're looking at other property. So in summary, you're going to go by your gut feel. When you walk in, what's the first thing you see at the front of this house? What's your gut telling you? Just jot it down. Be mindful of it. What are your thoughts versus other people's thoughts? So if I'm standing beside you and we're both looking at this house and I say, oh my God, I love it. And my other half says, oh my God, I hate it. In that voice, you got a conversation to have. And this is the kind of stuff that people mightn't necessarily talk about until after they've had this process. But this saves you arguments, feeling not heard, feeling disrespected, and just make a note of it. That's all you have to do. Okay? Then you're talking about your expectations. What was it you expected of this property based on the sales brochure, on your thoughts, on a drive-by, on what a neighbour or a family member told you versus what the reality is? And then what are the positives and the negatives? So it's always going to be one or the other on both sides. So the reason I say that is a brand new house may be absolutely stunning and needs no work, but you may not be able to put an extension, or it may have a small garden. An older property may have stunning features full of promise, but you may need to spend more money doing it up. Everything is always both sides. So there's always going to be a positive and always going to be a negative. And by looking at that each time, you're basically looking at the balance of each property you look at. So you're not gushing over thinking this is a phenomenal house and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's gorgeous. There will always be something on the other side. And it's not to be pessimistic, it's purely to note it so you can have a clear and open conversation. And then you decide whether you're going to bid. Let's say you want to bid. You have to put together a plan and a strategy and move ahead in that. And that's going to be in a future video. But let's say you don't want to bid. Although this house may be mentally checked off your list, go back to the agent, be communicative, be open. You don't have to tell them your life story. Just send an email or call them and say, dear agent, thank you for your time on Saturday. Really appreciate it. This isn't the house for us. And if you feel there's some feedback that's useful, you may say the fourth bedroom was too small for our needs. That's going to make it easier for that agent to give their client a little bit of feedback. But it also means when that agent sees you again, in their mind, they're ticking a box. This person's a good communicator. I remember this person was polite. I remember this person came back and made my job a little bit easier. And it's not your job to make their life easier, but by doing so in a small way, it makes it a lot easier to progress further when you're interacting with them again. And Ireland is a small place. So check out the viewing list, go through it, bring it with you to viewings, jot down notes. It doesn't have to be War and Peace. Keep it simple and always remember it's both sides. There's always positives and negatives. And that's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's always both.